The hushed anticipation of Lincoln Center's grand auditorium, usually reserved for the most sublime artists, was instead thick with a palpable, almost terrifying tension. Dr. Sarah Carter, her voice a calm counterpoint to the buzzing undercurrent of the crowd, delivered a revelation that detonated like a carefully placed charge. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the assembled mathematicians, the eager camera crews, and the global audience of millions. "I've just received communication from the International Mathematics Consortium. They need to make an immediate disclosure about tonight's competition." Richard Hartwell, resplendent in his tailored suit, a man whose entire empire was built on mathematical infallibility, recoiled visibly. His carefully constructed facade of smug certainty began to crack. This wasn't part of his meticulously crafted humiliation. This wasn't how his grand spectacle of intellectual superiority was supposed to unfold. Dr. Carter continued, her eyes briefly meeting Kesha Williams, who stood before the massive whiteboard, marker still poised, her hands trembling with exhaustion and burgeoning despair. The infinite bridge paradox that Mr. Hartwell presented tonight, according to documentation just submitted by MIT, Cambridge, and Princeton, this problem was designed specifically to be unsolvable, using conventional mathematical approaches. A collective gasp rippled through the auditorium. On screen, the faces of Dr. Webb, Dr. Kowalski, and Dr. Liu, the three acclaimed PhD contestants, were masks of dawning comprehension and professional horror. Hartwell's carefully chosen unsolvable problem was, in fact, literally unsolvable by human hand. The billionaire had not just been arrogant, he had been utterly, maliciously deceitful. He had set up a trap, not a challenge. He had chosen a problem requiring technological assistance precisely because he knew no human, no matter how brilliant, could solve it manually. The trap was sprung, but the prey wasn't who he thought it was. Fade to black. A flash of memory. 2 hours earlier, the clinking of silverware and the low murmur of privileged conversations were the usual soundtrack to Kesha Williams' nights at Leonard, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Tonight, however, the background noise was punctuated by the shrill, booming laugh of Richard Hartwell. He was the kind of man whose presence felt like an invasion, filling the air with the metallic tang of his self-importance. Kesha, navigating the packed tables with the practiced grace of a seasoned server, approached table 7, where Hartwell, the tech billionaire, was holding court. He had scribbled furiously on expensive napkins, an arcane language of mathematical equations spilling across the crisp linen. It was a familiar sight for the Leonard staff. Many of their high-profile clients used the white tablecloths and fine napkins as impromptu canvases for their genius. As Kesha reached for a half-empty water glass, intending to refill it, Hartwell's hand shot out. It wasn't a gentle swat. It was a rough shove, designed to assert dominance, to remind her of her place. The glass tipped, sending a crystalline arc of water splashing across his precious mathematical equations. Kesha flinched, a quiet apology already forming on her lips, but he cut her off, his voice rising, sharp and laced with disdain. "Look what you've done!" He pushed back his chair, the scraping sound harsh against the marble floor, and stood, his imposing height suddenly towering over her. "This proof," he declared, holding up a napkin, now damp and smeared, "stumped MIT's finest for months." His gaze, cold and contemptuous, raked over her, making her feel as insignificant as a smudge on his expensive leather shoes. Other diners at nearby tables, accustomed to Hartwell's boisterous displays, paused their conversations, curious to see the unfolding drama. He held up the soggy napkin, addressing the room more than Kesha, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Solve this. I'll give you everything I own." He punctuated his mock generosity with another barking laugh, a sound that grated on Kesha's nerves. Then, with a deliberate, theatrical sweep of his arm, he cleared the table. Salt shakers, pepper mills, delicate crystal glasses, they all crashed to the pristine marble floor in an explosive symphony of shattering glass. The sound was deafening, silencing the entire dining room. "Now clean it up," he commanded, his voice dripping with venom. "That's what your people are good for." Kesha knelt amidst the glittering debris, the humiliating words echoing in her ears. She felt the prickle of judgmental stares, the silent sympathy mixed with an almost morbid curiosity from the other patrons. But as her hands, trained to clean and serve, began to carefully gather the shards, her brilliant mind, trained at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, absorbed every number, every symbol from his soggy napkins. While he publicly debased her, she was quietly, unconsciously, solving what he believed impossible. The numbers, the equations, they sang to her, a familiar melody in the chaos. 3 blocks away from Leonard, the Lincoln Center's Avery Fisher Hall buzzed with a different kind of anticipation. Tonight marked the 15th annual $1 Million Math Challenge, an event where America's wealthiest and most brilliant minds gathered to present seemingly unsolvable problems to the world's brightest mathematicians. The rules, deceptively simple, concealed a brutal intellectual gladiatorial contest. Billionaire sponsors presented mathematical challenges that had stumped their own research teams for months, sometimes years. Any contestant who solved a problem won the corresponding prize money. The twist was that these weren't ordinary textbook math problems. They were cutting-edge research questions, often worth millions in patents and scientific breakthroughs. Richard Hartwell had never lost. In his 15 years as head judge and a perennial challenge setter, his problems remained undefeated. His formidable reputation wasn't built on luck or showmanship alone. The man had legitimately solved variations of Fermat's last theorem and had built a sprawling tech empire on mathematical algorithms that revolutionized artificial intelligence. But tonight, he felt, was different. The stakes, both personal and financial, were higher than ever before. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Sarah Carter announced from the podium, her voice, clear and resonant, carrying effortlessly across the packed auditorium. This year's total prize pool exceeds an astonishing $50 million. The audience erupted in a wave of enthusiastic applause, cameras flashing. Our contestants include PhD mathematicians from Harvard, MIT, Cambridge, and Oxford. Cameras rolled as CNN prepared for their live global broadcast. Social media buzzed with hashtags declaring that mathematical genius was about to become primetime entertainment for 300 million viewers worldwide. Back at Leonard, Keisha Williams finished the last pass with her mop, wiping away the sticky residue of Hartwell's destruction. Her manager, Yeppe, a man whose permanent scowl seemed etched into his face, grabbed her arm as she headed toward the kitchen. His grip was tight, his voice a low, urgent hiss in her ear. "You stay invisible tonight, Williams. Those VIP guests decide whether this restaurant keeps its reputation. One wrong move, and you're gone." Keisha nodded silently, her gaze fixed on the swinging kitchen door. She needed this job. Her grandmother's mounting medical bills wouldn't pay themselves, and the ghost of her student loans from MIT still haunted her credit score, a constant, chilling reminder of a dream deferred. 3 years ago, she had been just 1 semester away from completing her mathematics doctorate when financial reality had crashed down with the force of a tidal wave. Her father's construction accident, her mother's escalating diabetes medication costs, her younger brother's autism therapy bills. These numbers added up to an impossible choice: MIT or family. She had chosen family. Now, she cleaned up after people who would never know she had once published original research in topology theory. Her professors had called her work revolutionary. Her thesis advisor had predicted a Nobel Prize someday. None of that mattered when you couldn't afford tuition. Yeppe disappeared back into the kitchen, leaving Keisha alone with the VIP section's dirty dishes and shattered dreams. But as she cleared tables, fragments of conversations drifted over from nearby diners, intellectual tidbits that pierced through her emotional armor. "Hartwell's challenge this year is supposed to be impossible," whispered a woman adorned in glittering diamonds. "Something about infinite sequences and convergence theory." Her companion, a man whose expensive watch gleamed under the soft lighting, replied, "My husband's research team spent 2 years on it. They're calling it the convergence paradox. No solution exists." Keisha's hands stilled on the wine glasses she was collecting. Convergence theory. The words resonated deep within her, igniting a flicker of her old self. She had written her undergraduate thesis on convergence patterns in infinite series. Her mind, as if on autopilot, automatically began working through potential approaches, muscle memory from years of intense mathematical training kicking in. Despite her current circumstances, more fragments reached her ears as she moved between tables. "The preliminary problems are just warm-ups," a man was explaining to his date. "The real challenge comes at the end. Hartwell always saves his impossible proof for last." "What makes him so confident nobody can solve it?" the date asked. "Because he's Richard Hartwell," the man replied, a hint of awe in his voice. "The man's never been wrong about mathematics, ever." Keisha felt something stir in her chest. It wasn't anger, not exactly. More like a profound recognition. She knew that feeling of absolute mathematical certainty, that electrifying moment when patterns clicked into place with undeniable clarity. She had experienced it herself during countless late nights in MIT's sprawling library, solving problems that had stumped her own professors. But she also knew something Hartwell apparently didn't. Mathematical brilliance didn't announce itself with prestigious degrees or overflowing bank accounts. It whispered in the minds of people others overlooked, people like her. And sometimes, just sometimes, those whispers contained truths that the loudest, most confident voices completely missed. Her phone buzzed, a news alert flashing across the screen. $1,000,000 math challenge starting in 1 hour. Lincoln Center doors opening for public viewing parties. Yeppe emerged from the kitchen, scanning the dining room, his gaze landing on her. Williams, table 12 needs their check. Move! As Keisha hurried to comply, her mathematical mind was already 3 steps ahead. She had exactly 43 minutes left on her shift. Lincoln Center was a 12-minute walk from the restaurant. The competition's preliminary round would begin in 55 minutes. A spark of audacious courage, long dormant, ignited within her. Would she dare to step out of the shadows and into the light where her true abilities could finally shine? Keisha's hands trembled as she untied her apron in the restaurant's dimly lit back alley. The rough fabric felt alien against her skin, a heavy symbol of her current reality. Her shift had ended 3 minutes ago. Lincoln Center's golden lights beckoned from just 12 blocks away, a luminous beacon against the city's night sky. But each step toward it felt like crossing an ocean, a chasm separating her 2 worlds. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. The $1,000,000 math challenge wasn't for people like her. People who served coffee instead of discovering theorems. People who counted tips instead of publishing papers. Yet, in her pocket, Hartwell's soggy napkin, now dry and crinkled, seemed to burn against her fingertips. His equations, once a source of public humiliation, were now imprinted indelibly in her memory. She had found his error, not in days or months, but within 30 seconds of studying the scribbled proof. The man who had so casually, so cruelly humiliated her had made a fundamental mistake. One so embarrassingly basic that any decent mathematician, even an undergraduate, should have caught it. It was a sign convention error, a simple slip in the 7th equation, yet it invalidated his entire framework. Lincoln Center's lobby was packed, a vibrant tapestry of curious onlookers watching giant screens broadcasting the competition's initial stages. Keisha slipped through the crowd, her server's uniform still clinging to her, drawing dismissive glances from the impeccably dressed spectators. On screen, Dr. Sarah Carter, poised and professional, was introducing the final 3 contestants. Dr. Marcus Webb from Harvard's mathematics department, Dr. Elena Kowalski from Oxford, and Dr. James Liu from MIT, her former classmate who had finished the program she'd been forced to abandon. A pang of regret, sharp and momentary, pierced through her resolve. Before we begin the final challenge, Dr. Carter announced, her voice resonating through the lobby speakers, Mr. Hartwell would like to address our global audience. The camera panned to Richard Hartwell, immaculate in his tailored suit, standing confidently at center stage, a predatory glint in his eyes. He held up a sheet of paper covered in complex equations, his own, carefully prepared version of the proof. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice boomed across the auditorium, filled with the self-assured arrogance of a man who believed himself beyond reproach. Tonight I present the convergence paradox. My research team has spent 3 years developing this proof. It demonstrates that certain infinite sequences cannot converge under any known mathematical framework. The audience leaned forward, captivated. This was why they had come, to witness mathematical history in the making. Hartwell's eyes gleamed with absolute certainty, his conviction radiating from the screens. This proof has been verified by teams at Stanford, Caltech, and Princeton. It represents the absolute limit of human mathematical understanding. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of his pronouncement settle. If anyone, he declared, his voice growing louder, his arrogance filling every corner of the massive hall and echoing through the lobby, and I mean anyone in this room, can find even the smallest error in this proof. The billionaire's gaze swept over the audience, a challenge, a taunt. If anyone can solve this paradox that has stumped the world's greatest mathematical minds, I will personally write them a check for everything I own. My companies, my properties, my entire fortune. 50 billion. The audience gasped, a collective intake of breath. Social media exploded. This wasn't just a mathematical challenge anymore. This was the bet of the century, a public execution of intellectual pride. Kesha felt her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in her ears. In her pocket, Hartwell's napkin seemed to burn against her fingertips, a tangible accusation. She knew exactly where his proof failed. The error wasn't complex or subtle. It was embarrassingly basic, a rudimentary sign convention mistake in the seventh equation that invalidated his entire framework. But she was nobody, a dropout, a waitress. Who would believe her? Mr. Hartwell, Carter stepped forward, holding legal documents, her brow furrowed with concern. This is highly unusual. Are you certain about this challenge? Absolutely, Hartwell declared, his voice ringing with unshakable conviction. I'm so confident in my proof that I'm willing to stake everything on it. Because mathematics doesn't lie, Dr. Carter, and neither do I. The camera captured his smugness perfectly as he surveyed the stunned audience. 300 million viewers watched him place his signature on the legal guarantee. Lawyers scrambled to process the paperwork. This was no longer a competition. It was a public execution of mathematical pride. In the lobby, Kesha closed her eyes and made a choice that would change everything. She began pushing through the crowd, heading toward the auditorium entrance. "Excuse me, miss," a burly security guard interjected, blocking Kesha's path to the auditorium. His tone was firm, dismissive. "This area is for registered contestants and VIP guests only." Kesha, still reeling from the gravity of her decision, paused. Would a former MIT mathematics student have the courage to challenge the most arrogant man in America? The thought propelled her forward, a silent defiance. "I said this area is restricted," the security guard repeated, his hand moving toward his radio, a clear threat in his eyes. "You need to return to the public viewing area immediately." Kesha's voice came out steadier than she felt, a quiet force against the guard's gruffness. "I need to speak with Dr. Carter. It's about mathematical proof." The guard laughed, a harsh, derisive sound that cut through the lobby noise. "Lady, half the people here think they can solve million-dollar math problems. That's not how this works." But Dr. Sarah Carter, ever perceptive, had noticed the commotion near the entrance. Something about the young woman's quiet confidence, her unwavering gaze, caught her attention. As the head of Princeton's mathematics department, she had learned to recognize genuine mathematical intuition. It rarely announced itself with arrogance. "What seems to be the problem?" Dr. Carter approached, her expression one of curiosity rather than annoyance. Kesha pulled Hartwell's soggy napkin from her pocket, unfolded it carefully, and held it out. "There's an error in equation 7 of the convergence paradox. The sign convention switches from positive to negative iteration without justification." The auditorium surprisingly fell silent. 300 million viewers watched through cameras as a woman in a server's uniform dared to challenge the world's most confident mathematician. Dr. Carter took the napkin, her eyebrows rising slightly as she examined the scribbled calculations. These weren't random chicken scratches. The margins contained elegant derivations, shortcuts that most graduate students would miss. "Where did you study mathematics?" she asked, her voice intrigued. "MIT?" Kesha replied, her voice trailing off. 3 years of the doctoral program before... The reason didn't matter now. Hartwell's laughter boomed across the stage, a jarring intrusion into the tense silence. "Security! Remove this delusional woman immediately! I don't have time for desperate people seeking attention." But Dr. Carter raised a hand, silencing him. "Mr. Hartwell, she's identified a specific error. As competition director, I'm obligated to verify any mathematical challenge to your proof." "This is ridiculous!" Hartwell snarled, his face contorting with rage. "That woman was serving me coffee 2 hours ago. She probably can't balance a checkbook, let alone understand advanced mathematics." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of uncomfortable recognition and suppressed amusement. Many had seen her at Leonard. The irony was delicious, a bitter pill for Hartwell to swallow. The same person he had so casually humiliated was now questioning his mathematical supremacy. Dr. Carter walked to the giant display screen, a silent command in her posture. "Miss Williams," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. "Kesha Williams. Miss Williams, please explain your objection to equation 7. Kesha's hands shook slightly as she approached the microphone, the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. The auditorium stretched before her like an ocean of judgment, a vast sea of faces waiting to witness her failure. But mathematics had always been her safe harbor, the one place where truth mattered more than appearances, more than status. In equation 7, Mr. Hartwell assumes positive iteration when establishing the convergence boundary, she began, her voice gaining strength with each word, the familiar rhythm of mathematical logic calming her nerves. But in step 12, he switches to negative iteration without adjusting the asymptotic behavior. She moved to the whiteboard beside the main screen, borrowed a marker, and began writing with fluid, confident precision. If you're iterating positively, your limit approaches positive infinity along this trajectory. Her hand moved gracefully across the board, sketching curves and intricate mathematical symbols. But negative iteration creates a completely different convergence pattern. The limit actually approaches 2.847, not 0 as his proof claims. The three PhD contestants exchanged glances, a dawning realization on their faces. Dr. Webb from Harvard grabbed his calculator, his fingers flying across the keys. Dr. Kowalski from Oxford pulled out her laptop, running rapid calculations. Dr. Liu from MIT stared at the whiteboard with growing recognition, a flicker of awe in his eyes. "She's right," Dr. Liu whispered, loud enough for his microphone to catch. The asymptotic behavior completely changes with negative iteration. Dr. Carter quickly verified the calculation on her tablet. Her face showed surprise, then something approaching awe. "The correction is mathematically sound." Hartwell's face flushed crimson. "This is impossible. My team spent 3 years on this proof. We had it reviewed by experts at Stanford, Caltech, Princeton." "Sometimes," Keisha said quietly, her voice resonating with an unexpected power, "the most obvious errors are the hardest to see when you're too close to the problem." The auditorium erupted in applause. Social media exploded with clips of the unknown waitress schooling a billionaire mathematician. Waitress genius began trending worldwide within minutes. Hartwell wasn't finished. His rage simmered beneath a veneer of false composure. "Anyone can point out arithmetic errors," he snapped, dismissing Keisha's profound insight. "That doesn't make her a mathematician. This was lucky at best." But Dr. Carter, her expression thoughtful, studied her tablet screen where additional calculations were running. "Mr. Hartwell, this wasn't arithmetic. Miss Williams identified a fundamental conceptual error in convergence theory. Her correction opens an entirely new approach to infinite series analysis." The three PhD contestants were now huddled together, sketching variations of Keisha's correction on their scratch paper. Their earlier skepticism replaced by professional fascination. What she had revealed in 30 seconds was reshaping their understanding of problems they'd struggled with for years. "Furthermore," Dr. Carter continued, her voice gaining authority, "her mathematical notation suggests advanced training. These techniques aren't taught at the undergraduate level." Hartwell's confidence wavered for the first time in 15 years. My team will need to verify this independently." "Of course," Dr. Carter agreed, her tone measured. "But according to competition rules, any valid mathematical objection to the primary proof requires the challenger to proceed to the next level of difficulty." The audience held its breath. Keisha had passed the first test, but the real challenges were still ahead. Hartwell's eyes narrowed with renewed malice. "Fine. If this woman thinks she's so clever, let's see how she handles problems that actually matter. Dr. Carter, present the secondary challenges." "Miss Williams," Dr. Carter addressed her directly, a hint of concern in her voice. "Are you prepared to compete in the formal competition? The next 3 problems increase in difficulty significantly." Keisha looked out at the sea of faces. Some showed raw curiosity, others skepticism, a few displayed outright hostility, but scattered throughout the audience, she saw something else. Hope. People who, like her, had been underestimated and overlooked were leaning forward in their seats, their silent encouragement a balm to her frayed nerves. "I'm ready," she said simply, her voice clear and resolute. But as Dr. Carter prepared the next challenge, Hartwell was already planning his revenge. This wasn't just about mathematics anymore. This was about destroying the woman who dared to make him look foolish in front of the entire world. Could a former MIT dropout survive what was coming next? Dr. Carter raised her hand to quiet the buzzing auditorium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unprecedented situation. Miss Williams has successfully identified a fundamental error in tonight's primary challenge." The camera zoomed in on Keisha's face as she stood beside the whiteboard, markers still in her trembling hand. Her server's uniform looked absurdly out of place among the formal academic setting, a stark contrast to the tailored suits and evening gowns, but her mathematical work spoke louder than any credentials. According to competition rules, Dr. Carter continued, any challenger who identifies errors in preliminary proofs advances to the formal competition tier. Hartwell stepped forward, his face a mask of barely controlled rage, his voice a low growl. Dr. Carter, I demand we verify her background first. This woman has no business competing against legitimate mathematicians. My business, Keisha said quietly into her microphone, her voice resonating with an unexpected power, is mathematics, and mathematics doesn't care about my uniform. The audience erupted in a roar of applause. Social media feeds exploded with clips of her response. Mathematics doesn't care about your uniform began trending alongside #waitressgenius. But Hartwell wasn't backing down. Fine, if you want to play this game, let's raise the stakes. He gestured to his lawyers, who were frantically typing on laptops in the front row. Dr. Carter, I'm formally modifying my challenge. Mr. Hartwell, that's highly irregular, Dr. Carter interjected, her voice laced with warning. I'm doubling my wager, Hartwell declared, his voice carrying across the silent hall, an almost manic gleam in his eyes. 100 billion, everything I own, plus my company's combined assets. He pointed directly at Kesha, his finger an accusing spear. But now she has to solve 3 problems, not 1, and she gets only 60 minutes total. The auditorium gasped. The 3 PhD contestants looked stunned. This wasn't just a mathematical competition anymore. This was financial warfare. Dr. Carter checked her tablet, scrolling through competition regulations. The rules do allow for modified challenges if all parties consent. I accept, Keisha said before Dr. Carter could even finish. You don't understand what you're agreeing to, Dr. Webb from Harvard warned her, his voice tinged with genuine concern. These aren't textbook problems. They're cutting-edge research questions that teams of mathematicians work on for years. But Keisha's eyes were fixed on Hartwell. She'd seen that look before, the absolute certainty that he was about to crush someone he considered beneath him, the same look he'd worn while grinding his shoe into her foot and calling her people contaminated. Furthermore, Hartwell continued, sensing victory, a cruel smile spreading across his face, the competition will now be broadcast live to global news networks. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. Everyone will watch this woman fail spectacularly. Dr. Carter looked deeply concerned. Miss Williams, you're not obligated to accept these modifications. The original challenge stands, if you prefer. No, Keisha said firmly, her voice echoing with a newfound steel. I accept his terms, all of them. The viewing audience had grown from 300 million to over 500 million as news of the unprecedented challenge spread worldwide. In Leonard, Yeppe and the kitchen staff were crowded around a tablet, watching their former waitress face down America's most arrogant billionaire. Is she insane? Yeppe muttered. That man will destroy her. But in nursing homes and community colleges, in night shift break rooms and single-parent apartments, people who'd been overlooked and underestimated were gathering around screens with growing hope. Dr. Carter announced the new rules. 3 problems, 60 minutes total. Miss Williams will work at the main board. The existing contestants will compete simultaneously for comparison purposes. And when she fails, Hartwell added with a cruel smile, I want her to admit publicly that she's nothing but a fraud seeking attention. I want her to apologize to every viewer for wasting their time. The cruelty of the demand hit the audience like a slap. Even his own supporters seemed uncomfortable with the unnecessary humiliation clause. And when will I succeed? Keisha asked, her voice calm, challenging. Hartwell laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. You won't. But if I do? His lawyers were frantically trying to signal him to stop, but his arrogance had taken complete control, blinding him to all reason. If you somehow solve all 3 problems, which is mathematically impossible, then yes, you get everything, $100 billion and a public apology from me. The contracts were hastily rewritten and signed, cameras positioned for optimal angles, social media platforms crashed under the viewing load as word spread globally. Dr. Carter approached Keisha privately during the setup. Are you certain about this? There's no shame in competing under the original terms. There's shame in staying silent when someone thinks they can humiliate you without consequences, Keisha replied, her gaze steady. I've been quiet too long. As technicians finished positioning cameras and microphones, Hartwell made one final announcement, his voice dripping with condescension. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness the difference between real mathematical genius and desperate delusion. Watch carefully as this woman embarrasses herself in front of the entire world. But something had changed in Keisha's posture. The trembling hands were steady now. The uncertain voice had grown strong. She approached the massive whiteboard like a concert pianist approaching her instrument, not with fear, but with a quiet, fierce determination. The timer was set. The problems were sealed. 500 million people held their breath. Would the woman who cleaned up Hartwell's messes be able to clean up his mathematics as well? The 60-minute countdown began with a thunderous beep that echoed across Lincoln Center, a sonic declaration of war. Dr. Carter broke the seal on the first envelope, revealing Problem 1, Advanced Probability Theory with Quantum Applications. Kesha read the problem once, twice, then a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. The PhD contestants were already frantically scribbling equations, but she stood motionless for 30 seconds, absorbing the mathematical landscape in her mind, allowing the intricate patterns to unfurl. While Dr. Webb from Harvard struggled with the opening setup, Keisha, with an intuitive leap, identified an elegant shortcut. Instead of brute forcing through 17 variables, she recognized the problem as a disguised Markov chain. Her marker moved across the board with fluid precision, cutting through complexity like a knife through silk. The audience leaned forward, mesmerized. Even Hartwell, despite himself, looked surprised at her speed. But social media was brutal. Anonymous accounts flooded Twitter with vicious attacks. Fake waitress getting lucky. This is staged for views. She's probably getting answers through an earpiece. The hate was immediate and virulent. Meanwhile, Jeppe from Leonard was fielding phone calls from news outlets. She was always strange, he told reporters, his voice tinged with a mix of resentment and bewilderment, muttering numbers to herself, scribbling on napkins during breaks. We thought she might be mentally unstable. Dr. Carter opened the second envelope. Problem 2, topological manifolds and differential geometry. This was Keisha's specialty from MIT. She'd published undergraduate research on manifold theory that her professors had called revolutionary, work that explored the very fabric of space and dimension. Her approach was so unconventional, so startlingly fresh, that Dr. Kowalski from Oxford stopped her own work to watch. She's using Riemann mapping in reverse, Derlou whispered into his microphone, a note of wonder in his voice. That's actually brilliant. The cameras caught the amazement on the PhD contestants' faces. Here was someone thinking beyond their textbook approaches, finding pathways through mathematical landscapes they'd never even considered. But Hartwell, ever the opportunist, seized the moment for psychological warfare. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice dripping with manufactured concern, let me share what I discovered about our challenger during the break. His words hung in the air, ominous. Miss Williams was expelled from MIT for academic misconduct. The lie hit Keisha like a physical blow, a vicious punch to her already strained emotional core. She stumbled, nearly dropping her marker. The audience murmured with uncertainty. Her mathematical momentum shattered. That's not true, she said quietly, but her microphone barely picked up the protest. My sources at MIT confirm it, Hartwell continued smoothly, his eyes cold and unwavering. Plagiarism accusations. That's why she never finished her doctorate. In living rooms across America, viewers were switching between believing and doubting. The story felt too perfect, too much like a fairy tale. Surely waitresses couldn't solve problems that stumped PhD holders. Dr. Carter intervened with quiet authority. Mr. Hartwell, unless you have documentation, such accusations are inappropriate. She approached Keisha's board, studying the intricate work. Miss Williams, your topological approach here is genuinely original. I've never seen this particular mapping technique. The validation steadied Keisha's nerves. Mathematics didn't lie, even when people did. But the damage was spreading faster than her solutions. News outlets began running exclusive mystery mathematicians troubled past headlines. Cable news shows hosted experts who questioned whether the entire event was staged for ratings. Nobody jumps from serving coffee to solving research-level mathematics, declared a Yale professor on CNN, his voice dripping with disdain. The human brain doesn't work that way. 27 minutes remained. The third problem was still sealed. 2 problems solved, but barely. Keisha finished problem 2 with a flourish, her solution so elegant that the three PhD contestants applauded spontaneously. Even they recognized mathematical beauty when they saw it. Her work showed insights that graduate programs typically took years to develop, but Hartwell's legal team was working phones frantically. "We're getting reports that her solutions might be pre-programmed," one lawyer announced loudly enough for the cameras to catch. "This level of speed suggests technological assistance or prior knowledge." Security guards began inspecting the stage area, checking for hidden devices. The implication was clear. No legitimate contestant could perform at this level without cheating. The pressure cooker was intensifying. Camera angles multiplied. The global audience had grown to 700 million people. Social media platforms were buckling under the traffic load. Hashtag MathGenius and hashtag Waitress fraud were trending simultaneously. Dr. Carter opened the final envelope with solemn ceremony. Problem 3. The Infinite Bridge Paradox. Hartwell's personal masterpiece, a problem that had stumped research teams for years. Keisha read it once and felt something click into place in her mind. This wasn't just mathematics. This was 3 separate mathematical disciplines disguised as a single problem: number theory, topology, and convergence analysis, all woven together in a tapestry that looked impossible until you found the right perspective. But then disaster struck. Her calculator malfunctioned. The screen flickered and died, leaving her without computational support for the most complex calculations of her life. Technical difficulties happen. Hartwell shrugged with false sympathy, a predatory glint in his eye. "Perhaps we should postpone while we find her a working calculator." The audience was fracturing into camps. Supporters chanted, "Let her work," while skeptics called for verification of her identity. The mathematical community was split between fascination and suspicion. I don't need a calculator," Keisha announced, her voice carrying new strength, a quiet defiance. Mathematics existed long before electronic computation. She turned to the massive whiteboard and began working purely from mental calculation. Her mind processed numbers with the same fluidity that concert pianists read complex musical scores. Viewers watched in amazement as she performed calculations that most people needed computers to verify. With 8 minutes remaining, Keisha's exhaustion was showing. The mental strain of solving research-level mathematics while enduring public character assassination had pushed her to her limits. Her handwriting grew shakier, her explanations less fluid. Hartwell sensed weakness. "This is what happens when desperation meets reality," he announced to the cameras, his voice laced with triumph. Watch her collapse under pressure she was never qualified to handle. 7 minutes left. No calculator, global skepticism, character assassination, physical exhaustion. The weight of 700 million people's expectations pressing down on her shoulders. But as Keisha stared at the infinite bridge paradox, something remarkable happened. All the noise faded away, the jeers, the cameras, the crushing pressure. None of it mattered anymore. There was only mathematics. Pure, beautiful, undeniable mathematics. She saw the bridge that connected all 3 problems. She understood why Hartwell's teams had failed for years. They'd been trying to solve one impossible problem when they should have been solving 3 elegant ones. The solution required thinking beyond traditional frameworks. She needed to approach the problem not as a mathematician, but as an artist, seeing patterns where others saw chaos. Her marker began moving across the board with renewed energy. Not the frantic scribbling of someone under pressure, but the confident strokes of someone who had found her way home. 6 minutes remaining. The final battle was about to begin. Could pure mathematical intuition triumph over computational power and institutional prejudice? 5 minutes remained when Dr. Carter received an urgent message on her tablet. She read it twice, her expression shifting from confusion to something approaching shock. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice cutting through the auditorium's tension, "I've just received communication from the International Mathematics Consortium. They need to make an immediate disclosure about tonight's competition." The camera zoomed in on her face as she continued reading. Hartwell looked annoyed by the interruption, but something in Dr. Carter's tone suggested this wasn't routine. The infinite bridge paradox that Mr. Hartwell presented tonight. Dr. Carter paused, glancing at her tablet again. According to documentation just submitted by MIT, Cambridge, and Princeton, this problem was designed specifically to be unsolvable using conventional mathematical approaches. A murmur rippled through the audience. The PhD contestants stopped their frantic calculations and looked up from their work. The problem was created as part of a research initiative to identify mathematicians who think beyond traditional frameworks. It requires what the consortium calls intuitive pattern synthesis, the ability to see mathematical relationships that pure computational analysis cannot detect. Hartwell's face went pale. This wasn't part of his plan. Dr. Carter continued. Furthermore, the consortium reveals that Mr. Hartwell's own solution, developed over 3 years, relied heavily on quantum computing algorithms and AI-assisted pattern recognition. No human mathematician has ever solved this problem using manual calculation alone. The auditorium fell silent. 700 million viewers were witnessing the rules of engagement completely change. This means, Dr. Carter said carefully, her gaze resting on Keisha, that Miss Williams is attempting something that has never been accomplished in the history of modern mathematics. She's working without any computational assistance on a problem specifically designed to require technological augmentation. Hartwell stepped forward, panic creeping into his voice. Dr. Carter, this disclosure is highly inappropriate. The competition parameters were clearly established. Actually, Mr. Hartwell, the consortium's letter indicated, that you were aware of the problem's special classification when you selected it tonight. The question they're raising is whether it was ethical to present an unsolvable challenge without disclosure. The twist hit everyone simultaneously. Hartwell hadn't just been arrogant. He'd been deliberately setting up an impossible scenario. He'd chosen a problem that required technological assistance specifically because he knew no human could solve it manually. But Keisha Williams was still working at the whiteboard, completely absorbed in her calculations. She was 4 minutes away from attempting something that the world's mathematical establishment considered impossible. The global audience was no longer just watching a competition. They were witnessing a woman challenge the very limits of human mathematical capability. Had Hartwell's arrogance finally trapped him in a web of his own making? The revelation hit Keisha like a physical blow. She stopped mid-calculation, her marker frozen against the whiteboard, her mind a sudden void of despair. The problem she'd been confidently solving for the past hour wasn't just difficult. It was designed to be impossible for human minds to solve. No human has ever solved this manually. Dr. Carter's words echoed in her head like a death sentence. Around her, the PhD contestants had already given up. Dr. Webb from Harvard shook his head in defeat. If it requires quantum computing, there's no point continuing. Dr. Kowalski from Oxford closed her notebook with resignation. Even Dr. Liu from MIT, who'd been supportive of Keisha's unconventional approaches, stepped away from his board, his shoulders slumped. But the worst part was watching the global audience lose faith in real time. Social media sentiment shifted from curiosity to pity. She's been set up to fail. Hartwell planned this humiliation from the beginning. No one could solve an impossible problem. 3 minutes and 40 seconds remained on the countdown timer, but it might as well have been 0. How do you solve a problem that the world's greatest mathematical minds, assisted by the most powerful computers, considered beyond human capability? Keisha stared at her work on the whiteboard. All her calculations suddenly felt meaningless. She'd identified the 3 separate mathematical disciplines hidden within the paradox: number theory, topology, and convergence analysis. She'd found elegant connections between them. But if the problem required technological assistance that she didn't have, then all her insights were worthless. The auditorium was no longer silent with anticipation. It was silent with sympathy. 700 million people were watching her inevitable failure, and she could feel their pity radiating through the cameras. A heavy, suffocating blanket. Miss Williams, Dr. Carter approached gently, her voice low and empathetic. Given this new information about the problem's classification, no one would fault you for stepping away. What you've accomplished tonight is already remarkable. Keisha looked at Dr. Carter, then at the expectant faces in the audience. She saw Jeppe from Leonard smirking on a video call, probably telling reporters that he'd known she was delusional all along. She saw Hartwell's lawyers furiously working their phones, likely preparing damage control statements about how their client had been protecting the integrity of mathematics by exposing fraudulent claims. But worst of all, she saw the disappointment in the eyes of people who'd believed in her, the night shift workers who'd paused their jobs to watch, the single mothers who'd seen themselves in her struggle, the students who'd been told they weren't smart enough. They'd invested their hope in her impossible dream, and now she was about to let them all down. "I can't do it," she whispered, her voice barely audible through the microphone. "I thought I could see the solution, but if it's impossible..." Her confidence, built up through years of mathematical study and natural intuition, crumbled completely. She was just a waitress who'd been foolish enough to believe she could compete with billionaires and PhDs. The humiliation burned through her chest like acid. Hartwell sensed his moment of triumph. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice slicing through the heavy silence, "this is what happens when delusion meets reality. Miss Williams has been living in a fantasy where serving coffee qualifies her to solve problems that stump the world's finest minds." The cruelty in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just about mathematics anymore. It was about putting her back in what he considered her proper place. But then, cutting through the despair, came a voice that changed everything. "Keisha!" Dr. Carter's voice was quiet but firm. She moved closer, speaking directly to her rather than the cameras, her gaze unwavering. "Mathematics doesn't care about classifications or committees or what's supposed to be impossible. You've seen something in this problem that others haven't. Trust your mind." Dr. Carter gestured toward the whiteboard. "Look at your work. Really look at it. You haven't been solving 3 separate problems. You've been building something entirely new." Kesha turned back to her equations. Through her tears of frustration, she began to see what Dr. Carter meant. Her approach hadn't been following traditional mathematical pathways. She'd been creating bridges between disciplines that weren't supposed to connect. Maybe the problem wasn't that she lacked the right technology. Maybe the problem was that everyone else had been thinking about it wrong. 2 minutes and 15 seconds remained. Could she find the courage to attempt the impossible one more time? 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Keisha wiped her eyes and turned back to the whiteboard with renewed purpose. Dr. Carter was right. She hadn't been solving 3 separate problems. She'd been building something that had never existed before. The infinite bridge paradox wasn't about finding a single solution. It was about creating a mathematical language that could describe infinity itself. "I see it now," she whispered, her voice growing stronger, a nascent power blooming within her. The marker moved across the board with fluid confidence as her mathematical intuition took complete control. While Hartwell and his team had spent 3 years using quantum computers to brute force their way through calculations, Keisha had been unconsciously developing something far more elegant. She wasn't computing the solution, she was discovering it. The first bridge connected number theory to topology. Where traditional mathematics saw infinite sequences as separate entities, Keisha recognized them as points on a continuous surface. Her hand moved rapidly, sketching mathematical curves that demonstrated how infinite series could be mapped onto geometric shapes. "She's treating infinity like a landscape." Dr. Liu from MIT whispered in amazement, "Not a mathematical concept, but a physical space you can navigate." The second bridge linked topology to convergence analysis. Here, Keisha's approach became truly revolutionary. Instead of trying to prove convergence through limit calculations, she showed how mathematical functions could flow like rivers across the topological surface she'd created. The audience was mesmerized. Even people without mathematical training could see the beauty in her visual approach. She was making the abstract concrete, the impossible tangible. But Hartwell wasn't finished. "This is mathematical poetry, not rigorous proof," he announced desperately, his voice cracking with a rising fear. "She's drawing pretty pictures instead of providing numerical solutions." Kesha paused in her work and faced him directly. The moment had arrived for the first of the 3 golden beats. "Your elegant solution has one small problem, Mr. Hartwell," she said calmly, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium with a quiet power. "You assumed that infinity is always infinite." The statement hung in the air like a profound challenge, a sudden shift in the intellectual landscape. Hartwell's face showed confusion, then alarm as he began to understand what she meant. "In your quantum-assisted proof, you treated all infinities as equivalent, but there are different kinds of infinity. Some are countable, others uncountable. Some converge, others diverge. The bridge you missed is that they're all connected. 90 seconds remaining." Keisha turned to complete the third and most crucial bridge, the synthesis that unified all 3 mathematical disciplines into a single, elegant framework. Her marker flew across the board, connecting equations with geometric shapes, linking abstract concepts with visual representations. She was operating on pure mathematical instinct, her mind processing relationships that had never been formally described. The solution wasn't emerging from calculation, it was being born from intuition. "Incredible," Dr. Carter breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "She's created a unified field theory for infinite sequences." The three PhD contestants had stopped pretending to work and were simply watching in awe. Dr. Webb from Harvard was taking photographs of her work with his phone. Dr. Kowalski from Oxford was frantically scribbling notes, trying to follow her logic. 30 seconds. Keisha stepped back and surveyed her work. The entire massive whiteboard was covered with equations, diagrams, and connections that formed a coherent mathematical argument. But more than that, it was beautiful. The kind of mathematical beauty that reminded people why they'd fallen in love with numbers in the first place. "There," she said simply, her voice clear and strong. "The infinite bridge paradox isn't a paradox at all. It's a map showing how different types of infinity connect to each other." The countdown timer reached 0. Silence filled Lincoln Center, a profound, breathless hush. Dr. Carter approached the board with her tablet, running verification algorithms against Keisha's work. The three PhD contestants crowded around, checking her logic step by step, their faces a mixture of wonder and disbelief. The cameras captured every equation, every connection, every elegant leap of mathematical reasoning. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Carter spoke, her voice filled with a mixture of reverence and triumph. "The mathematical reasoning is sound. Not only sound, but revolutionary. Miss Williams has created an entirely new approach to infinite series analysis." The auditorium erupted, a cacophony of cheers and applause. But Hartwell wasn't ready to concede. "One professor's opinion doesn't constitute mathematical proof. I demand independent verification from multiple institutions." Dr. Carter nodded, a subtle smile playing on her lips. "Of course. I've already sent Miss Williams' work to MIT, Stanford, Princeton, Cambridge, and Oxford. Their response should arrive momentarily." The tension was unbearable. 700 million people around the world held their breath as the mathematical establishment prepared to render its verdict on work created by a former waitress in less than 60 minutes. Dr. Carter's tablet chimed with incoming messages, a series of urgent pings. She read the first one aloud. "MIT Mathematics Department. Miss Williams' approach represents a paradigm shift in infinite series theory. We recommend immediate publication in the Journal of Mathematical Innovation." Another chime. "Stanford confirms the mathematical validity and notes applications to quantum field theory." Then Princeton, then Cambridge, then Oxford. Each message brought the same unequivocal verdict. Keisha Williams had solved the impossible. The moment arrived for the second golden beat. Keisha faced the cameras directly, her voice calm and powerful, her eyes gleaming with an undeniable truth. "The beautiful thing about mathematics is it doesn't care who you think deserves to be right." The auditorium fell completely silent. This wasn't just about solving a problem anymore. This was about truth confronting arrogance, merit defeating prejudice, brilliance refusing to be silenced by status. All eyes turned to Hartwell, the man who had built his reputation on mathematical supremacy, who had publicly wagered everything on his certainty, who had spent the evening humiliating the woman who had just proven him utterly, definitively wrong. For 15 years, Richard Hartwell had never been defeated. For 15 years, he had been the undisputed champion of mathematical competition. But 15 years of arrogance had just met 60 minutes of pure, unadulterated genius. The camera zoomed in on his face as he stared at the whiteboard, understanding finally, painfully dawning. Keisha Williams hadn't just solved his impossible problem. She had revolutionized the mathematical foundation on which his entire career was built. The third golden beat was coming. The moment when arrogance would be forced to acknowledge brilliance, when prejudice would bow to truth, when the impossible would become undeniable. Would the most arrogant man in America find the courage to admit he had been defeated by the woman he had tried to destroy? The moment stretched like eternity. Hartwell stood frozen, staring at mathematical work that had just destroyed 15 years of his supremacy. But before he could speak, Dr. Carter's tablet chimed with an urgent message that would change everything once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying a mix of amazement and concern, "I've just received an extraordinary communication from the International Patent Office." The cameras swiveled toward her as she continued reading. "Miss Williams's solution methodology, it appears, has applications far beyond pure mathematics. Her unified approach to infinity analysis has immediate implications for quantum computing, artificial intelligence optimization, and cryptocurrency encryption protocols." A murmur rippled through the auditorium, a wave of profound understanding. This wasn't just academic mathematics anymore. The preliminary economic impact assessment suggests that companies implementing her mathematical framework could see efficiency improvements of 300 to 500% in computational processing. Hartwell's face went ashen. His entire tech empire was built on algorithms that Keisha's breakthrough had just made obsolete. Furthermore, Dr. Carter continued, the Patent Office is requesting immediate documentation of Miss Williams's methodology to prevent unauthorized commercial exploitation. They're estimating the potential intellectual property value at... She paused, double-checking the figure on her screen, her voice barely a whisper. $200 billion. The auditorium exploded into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Camera crews were pushing forward for better angles. The 3 PhD contestants were frantically photographing the whiteboard before anyone could erase it. But the most stunning revelation was yet to come. Dr. Carter raised her hand, signaling for silence. There's one more thing. The Mathematical Consortium has just informed me that tonight's competition was partially designed as a talent identification initiative. They've been searching for mathematicians capable of breakthrough thinking that transcends traditional computational approaches. She turned to face Keisha directly, a radiant smile on her face. Miss Williams, they're formally inviting you to lead a new research institute dedicated to intuitive mathematics, with full funding and academic support. The twist hit everyone simultaneously. This hadn't just been a competition, it had been a recruitment process, and the woman who'd been serving coffee 12 hours ago had just become the most sought-after mathematical mind in the world. But Hartwell still hadn't spoken. The man who'd wagered everything on his mathematical supremacy now faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. Would he honor his public commitment, or would his arrogance find one final way to avoid the consequences of his cruelty? The silence stretched across Lincoln Center like a held breath. 700 million people around the world waited for Richard Hartwell to speak the words that would complete the most extraordinary reversal in mathematical history. His lawyers were frantically whispering in his ear, probably advising him to find legal loopholes or claim the competition had been compromised. His associates had already begun backing away from him, sensing the sudden seismic shift in power dynamics. But Hartwell was staring at the whiteboard where Keisha Williams had created something that transcended his understanding. For the first time in his life, he was faced with mathematical brilliance that exceeded his own. The moment arrived for the third and final golden beat. His voice cracked slightly, a fragile sound. He cleared his throat and tried again, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I need to verify the calculations myself. The audience held its breath as he approached Keisha's work, studying each equation, each connection, each elegant leap of reasoning. Minutes passed in complete silence, broken only by the whirring of camera lenses. Finally, he stepped back from the board. When he turned to face the cameras, 15 years of mathematical arrogance had been replaced by something approaching humility, a raw, uncomfortable honesty. Miss Williams, he said quietly, his voice devoid of its former bombast, your solution is correct. Completely correct. You've solved advanced mathematical proofs that I could not, demonstrating superior mathematical intuition and problem-solving ability that I failed to recognize. The words seemed to physically pain him, each syllable a confession, but he continued, his gaze, for the first time, meeting hers with a glimmer of respect. I built my career on being right about mathematics. Today I learned something more valuable than being right. I learned how to be wrong with dignity. The auditorium erupted in thunderous applause, a cathartic release of tension. But the most powerful moment was watching Keisha's quiet grace in victory. No gloating, no revenge, just the serene confidence of someone who had proven that brilliance couldn't be silenced by prejudice. 6 months later, Dr. Keisha Williams stood in her new office at the Institute for Intuitive Mathematics, writing equations that would reshape humanity's understanding of infinity. The walls were decorated not with awards or accolades, but with pictures of students from underfunded schools whose mathematical talents she was now helping to discover. She kept one memento from that night at Lincoln Center: Hartwell's soggy napkin, now dry and carefully framed on her desk, not as a trophy, but as a poignant reminder that genius often whispers in places where others refuse to listen. The final shot showed her teaching a classroom of diverse students, writing on a whiteboard with the same fluid confidence she'd shown that night. Above the board, a simple message illuminated for all to see. Mathematics doesn't care about your uniform. It only cares about your courage to see what others cannot. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look or where you work? Share your story in the comments below. Subscribe to Blacktail Stories for more incredible stories of people who prove the doubters wrong. Because genius isn't about where you start. It's about refusing to let anyone else define your limits. Remember, somewhere right now, the next revolutionary idea is forming in a mind that others might overlook. Make sure you're not one of the people doing the overlooking.